last evening, that was October 20th, 1993, in front of 10735 110th Street. And Mr. Joseph Scopa was the victim of a homicide. Mr. Scopa received multiple gunshot wounds to his body. He thus expired at Jamaica Hospital a short time later.
During the 40s and the 50s, more and more people fell victim not only to heroin, but to a host of synthetics. While long used as a means of temporary escape from the ghetto, marijuana in 1963 became one of the symbols of a youth in revolution. Our criminal statutes became harsher, penalties stiffer. There was virtually no difference in the eyes of the law between selling a deck of heroin on a street corner or selling marijuana in a college dorm.
The quiet on 102nd Road and 85th Street in Ozone Park, Queens, was interrupted last night with sounds that signaled murder. 2 gunshots to the neck that took the life from a 57-year-old.
It's 4 a.m. on December 20, 1973, in Bath Beach, Brooklyn. Neighbors in a residential building on the Bath Beach waterfront wake up to the spray of gunfire on the building's first floor. Police are called on the scene and come to find a murder suspect awaiting trial, Ralph Gaglione, shot dead in the building. Gaglione was a member of the Gambino Mafia family, a sprawling New York City gang with criminal ties all over the US and Italy. Gaglione was just one of hundreds of low-level criminals involved with the Mafia. He'd been killed for messing up a shooting in 1972, and his killer was 29-year-old Gerard Pappa, a member of another Mafia named the Genovese family. Pappa was a drug trafficker who'd survived shooting after shooting in the past, and became so good at making money and taking lives that his recklessness, violence, and arbitrary murders were always excused as a cost his bosses were willing to tolerate. But he would meet his own fate 7 years later in 1980. His fall began in '74 with the murder of his close friend James Emma, who was standing next to Pappa as he cleaned his car in Bensonhurst. Drive-by killers sent by a leader within another Mafia family named the Colombo family, Dominic Shallow, then drove up on the pair and sprayed them suddenly. Emma died as Pappa leapt into a passing car through an open window, the driver barely noticing as he hit the gas in a panic to avoid the bullets. Shallow, in an unrelated matter, was later shot dead and buried in the basement of Otto's Social Club, found there alongside other human remains. Pappa was later arrested by police and taken to the local precinct, where he filed paperwork for a police protection order. A lot of respect was lost for him after that move, and he became more vulnerable to his enemies. That buildup would lead to his fall in 1980. That year, a conflict had broken out among marijuana dealers in Bath Beach. Mafia brothers Ralph and Thomas Sparrow had been extorting New York marijuana dealers for years by then, but when one of their victims refused to comply, the Sparrow brothers kidnapped his child and held him for ransom. The dealer then put out a $500,000 contract for the Sparrows, the price so high since they both held big status in the New York underworld. Gerard Pappa, Barclay Farenga, and 2 others accepted the contract. They shot Ralph dead outside his Bath Beach home, and then, soon after, kidnapped Thomas, killed him, and buried him in the foundation of a building that Pappa owned. On July 11, 1980, at around 11:30 a.m., Pappa walked into the Villa 66 restaurant when a group of Genovese hitmen, Dominic Cataldo, Nicholas Cataldo, and Joseph Cataldo Jr., shot him within seconds of him stepping foot inside, slamming him with fire from a sawed-off shotgun and leaving him for dead. His traumatic death also left his then 5-year-old son, John Pappa, to be raised by the streets.
You could still hear the Christmas music coming from the house. Vincent Fasaro had been hanging a Christmas garland around the door when he was shot from behind. His wife and mother were inside the house and heard the shots.
Pappa's life began on July 19, 1974, born into the family of his mafia killer father, who had a reputation of taking lives left and right. When his father was clipped on the cusp of his son's 6th birthday, Pappa's mother moved to Holmdel, New Jersey to get her son away from his father's life. He did well in school and went on to become a high school soccer athlete, but he had aspirations for the streets. His stepfather was a drug trafficker as well, who ended up getting incarcerated while Pappa was still young. Living under his father's his legacy, John Pappa got a tattoo on his arm that said Papa Bear, one of the nicknames his dad was given by his friends, and had Morte prima di disonere, death before dishonor, tattooed across his back in Italian. He began going back and forth to Staten Island and eventually hooked up with drug dealers and began slinging himself. He came into contact with James Gallione, a member of a New York mafia named the Lucchese family. Gallione was a coke dealer and was the son of the murdered Ralph Gallione. He came up in 1989 when he successfully murdered Costabile Farace, a 29-year-old Bushwick gangster, strongman, and drug dealer who'd killed an undercover DEA agent. Farace went on the run for over a year before his location was found, and Gallione gunned him down in the middle of the street on the night of November 17, 1989. However, Gallione didn't want Pappa and his crew, due to Pappa's father being his father's murderer, and so Pappa, who still had jobs with Gallione's drug crew, found an entrance into the Colombo Mafia and took it, but he would take it at arguably the worst time.
In Brooklyn, a low-level mobster is put to rest, shot dead in broad daylight. Days later, another reputed gangster snuffed out, execution style. Then gunfire at a bagel shop kills an innocent teenager. He's sprayed with bullets meant for someone else.
When Pappa joined the family around 1990, they were unstable. The gang's boss, Carmine Persico, was sitting in prison with a 140-year-long life sentence. Victor Orena, who was a professional gangster who modeled himself like a businessman in the real world, had been chosen by Persico to run the mafia for him. Since Persico's brother Alphonse was also in jail, Orena kept things civil within the family, but he was making his own decisions and taking lives where he saw fit. Influence started creeping in from outside sources, namely the boss of the Gambino family, John Gotti, who saw Orena as an opportunity to get rid of his rival Persico. The mafia clans of New York City were run by a commission, which was a board of directors for the Italian mafia. Each family had its own vote on the board, but with Gotti's friend Orena running the Colombo family, if he was able to get rid of Persico, he could essentially have 2 votes. And so, he began pushing for Orena to get rid of Persico's people. Orena went to the commission and tried to push for them to oust Persico, but they rejected his request. He then tried a second way, going to his advisor Carmine Sessa, a gang official known as a consigliere within the mafia world, and asked Sessa to indiscreetly take a vote of who within the Colombo family was with him and who was with Persico. His consigliere then traveled out to FCI Lompoc, visited Persico in the prison, and exposed what Orena was doing. On June 20, 1990, Sessa and 4 others parked down the street by Orena's home and waited for him to arrive, but he came down the road in the same direction that they did, and once he recognized their faces, hit the gas and sped away. On November 18, 1991, one of Persico's strongest loyalists, Greg Scarpa, was ambushed while out driving with his daughter and grandson in a separate car behind him, but he managed to slam the gas, crash into bystanders, and escape his would-be killers. The shooting left him alive, but shaken up and angry. Scarpa was dying, having gotten AIDS from a blood transfusion gone wrong, as the donor who he'd gotten the blood from was a steroid user who got AIDS off of a dirty needle. With Scarpa's worsening condition, he didn't have much to lose.
Scarpa was considered a top echelon informant, and great care was taken to keep their meetings secret.
Also fueling things was the fact that he was an undercover FBI informant, unknown to anyone around him due to the fear and respect he got for his brutality.
Hines says that when an innocent victim was gunned down last November in what he called a mob-controlled bagel shop, something had to be done.
Scarpa had been an informant for decades by then, and his status in the bureau allowed him to get away with essentially anything. His corrupt handler began egging him on to get things going in the street, and soon enough, Scarpa became Persico's one-man army. Following his shooting, he began patrolling Brooklyn with a crew, out looking for any of Orena's men so he could kill them right on the spot.
So far, at least 13 members of the Colombo crime family have been murdered. Another 16 barely escaped with their lives.
Between that fateful November 1991 afternoon and December of 1992, shootings plagued New York, several happening each week during some months. Scarpa and his men targeted anyone they could, including Teamster official Nicky Grancho, whose face was blown off by a shotgun, Orena soldier Vincent Fusaro, who was shot dead off a ladder outside of his home in front of his family while hanging up Christmas decorations, and Joel Cacace, one of Orena's top-ranking men and a cop killer who was shot numerous times outside a dry cleaner by Scarpa, but survived and switched sides to Persco. On December 8, 1991, Chris Liberatore, an Orena loyalist, was out on the hunt with the crew for Francis Guerra and Anthony Ferrara as revenge for Fusaro's murder. When their hunt failed, they went home, but Liberatore's friend James Malpeso was shot that same day, and James's father decided blood needed to be spilled. Liberatore walked into Wannabe, a mafia hangout owned by Guerra, and shot the 17-year-old cashier Matteo Speranza, a civilian, dead at the register. Things started to fall apart nearing the end of 1992. On December 29, Scarpa, under house arrest at this point, went with his son Joey to a home owned by Michael DeRosa and Ronald Moran, two street dealers who worked for the Lucchese family. There was a failed drug deal between them and Joey, so Scarpa drove his son up to the home, knocked on the door, and shot DeRosa, while Moran shot back and took out one of Scarpa's eyes. Following the shooting, Scarpa's parole was revoked, and he was returned to prison, now half-blind and dying of AIDS. Police closed in on the Colombo family through the assistance of informants, catching Orena hiding out at the construction site of his girlfriend's home on April 4, 1992. Sesa flipped, as did Persco loyalists John Pappa and Lawrence Mazza, Scarpa's young protege, who police named in 25 murders. Police cracked down hard on the Colombo family, arresting 60 men from Persco's side and 61 from Orena's side. 30 people were dead, 3 of whom were civilians, and 18 of whom went missing and were never seen again. The final strike of the war took place on October 20, 1993, a well-planned murder job carried out by John Pappa, who had the dream of finally being made within the family.
Last evening, that was October 20th, 1993, in front of 107-35 110th Street, Mr. Joseph Scopa was the victim of a homicide. Mr. Scopa received multiple gunshot wounds to his body. He thus expired at Jamaica Hospital a short time later.
So many of Persco's men were off the streets by that point that the ones left began outsourcing their work to lower-level gangsters, dealers, and addicts. Joseph Scopa was a major mobster, his entire life spent within the Colombo family. He was the vice president of a cement union, and more importantly, Orena's second-in-command, his highest-ranking captain. Back in the 1970s, Scopa teamed up with Gambino mobsters John Gotti and his brother Gian to hijack trucks, and by the 90s was running a large-scale loan sharking ring with Gian Gotti, which had $1 million out in street loans. Persco's family wanted Scopa gone, and so the order was passed through his nephew Theodore, known as Skinny Teddy. Theodore, in prison, was allowed to attend his grandmother Eleanor's funeral at the Scarpacci funeral home. While at the funeral, in the view of correction officers and his hands cuffed up, he turned to a trio of Persco loyalists, including Anthony Russo, and whispered, "You've got to kill Joey." The order was then passed down a chain of command. Russo got the word out on the street, while Theodore's cousin Michael Persco got a MAC-10 with a suppressor, and then handed it off to an intermediary who got the gun to a hit crew. The crew was set up by Eric Curjo, a drug dealer and chop shop owner who brought together his friends John Spadaccino and John Pappa. Meanwhile, Russo served as a getaway driver, while Francis Guerra drove a third car and put it in the middle of the street to block any traffic. Curjo was a drug dealer and auto body shop owner. His friend Joey Borti would go around Carroll Gardens at night, driving through the streets, looking for cars parked on the side of the road. He would then smash them up and pour corrosive materials on them, to the point that the car owners would have no choice but to get them repaired. The nearest shop to the area was Curjo's shop, generating artificial business for himself.
We believe so, yes.
The perpetrators were waiting for him. Is that correct?
That's what our indications are, yes.
On the night of October 20, 1993, Scopa was driving home from dinner with his nephew Dominic Logazzo and his daughter's fiancée Angelo Barone. He planned to go meet with John Gotti loyalists Michael De Leonardo and his son John Gotti Jr., but as he pulled up to his Queens home, Sparacino sprayed Scopa's car but missed every shot. Scopa managed to get out and took off running, while Sparacino dropped the MAC-10, hit the gas, and sped away. Curcio stood and watched as Pappa then chased Scopa, who hid behind a tree. He was afraid that his victim had a gun, but when Scopa threw a phone at him as a way to try and scare him off, Pappa shot him 8 times with a .380. He and Curcio then took off running as a witness watched them run 3 whole blocks to another getaway vehicle. Scopa was the final death in the Colombo family's vicious war, but it wouldn't be Pappa's last. It did, ironically, however, mark the beginning of the end for his career on the street, despite having just started. A couple of days after the hit, Russo was approached by others within the family who wanted answers about who killed Scopa, but he told them he had no idea. He soon discovered that Curcio was going around openly bragging about the hit to build infamy, despite Pappa being the shooter. Russo and Guerra then went to Michael Persico and complained that Curcio was talking too much, causing concerns to form. Meanwhile, Pappa, now just 19, grew a taste for blood and began getting more swaggerish. He thought he was gonna get made at any second due to the slaying of such a high-level gangster, and all he wanted to do now was sell more drugs and take more lives. Pappa, Sparacino, and Curcio had a strong relationship. The trio were friends with a number of other local gangsters, including Calvin Henniger and Rolando Rivera. Curcio and Pappa would often eat dinner at Sparacino's mother's home, who saw them as her son's best friends. They were also close to Sparacino's brother Salvatore, and they all worked together on the streets to try and make money at a young age. On June 7, 1994, Pappa and Curcio would take Rivera's life. Cracks were forming within their friend group. Sparacino began to go around claiming all the credit for Scopa's murder, despite never getting a single shot on him. Curcio then told Rivera to stay away from Sparacino, hinting that they were planning on killing him. For whatever reason, Rivera felt the need to tell his girlfriend the information. Word spreads fast in the underworld, but bullets spread faster. If word got to Sparacino that Curcio had issued such a warning, he could strike first and kill Curcio. On June 7, 1994, Curcio and Pappa picked up Rivera in a stolen van, drove him into Staten Island, and shot him in the car before pushing him onto the street without stopping. Rivera laid in the street, bleeding out in agony across the day, until an off-duty cop saw him that night and called for help, but Rivera passed away right after. Pappa would take his next life a month later. Issues arose between him and Anthony Della Vecchia, a drug dealer who worked for James Gallione, as Pappa had reason to believe that Della Vecchia had killed one of his close friends. However, Della Vecchia, like Gallione, was in the Lucchese family and had protected status. And so, Pappa planned on killing Della Vecchia's cousin, Carmine Gargano Jr., a drug dealer and a 21-year-old student at Pace University. Just a few days prior to the murder plot, 6'2", 230-pound Gargano had gone into a fight with Michael DeRosa at T-Bird's Bar and Grill, and DeRosa threatened to kill Gargano as security forced him out of the establishment. It was the perfect opportunity for Pappa to strike and frame DeRosa for the hit. Dino Calabro, the protege of Colombo war veteran Thomas Gioelli, who himself was close to the family's top administration, including Joel Cacace, now the leader of the family, organized Gargano Jr.'s murder and got his own protege, Joseph Compatiello, to take care of it. On July 10, 1994, at around midday, Gargano left his parents' Brooklyn home to go jet skiing when he suddenly went missing. Compatiello and Pappa then took him to Sunshine Collision, a car shop in Coney Island, and shot him. However, the bullets didn't instantly kill the 6'2" Gargano, who put up a struggle, and Compatiello had to grab the shovel they were going to use to bury him to slam him in the head until he fell. They then buried the body in the shop, and Pappa began bragging about how no one would ever see him again. They later had to move the body to another site in Long Island, when Gargano's parents began investigating the murder and got threats from the mafia members in response. Later that year, a leader within another New York mafia clan named the Bonanno Mafia family, Anthony Graziano, began planning to murder Pappa. Pappa and Hennigar had been at Graziano's strip club in Staten Island when they shot the place up for unknown reasons, leading to the club falling into a panic and one of the customers getting shot and wounded. Graziano began pushing for his people to go out and murder the 2 Colombo thugs, but was brought to a meeting with their supervisors, and the men all reached the settlement, saving Pappa and Hennigar. Graziano would be indicted for conspiracy to commit murder over the episode just 8 years later. Pappa and Curcio then turned their attention to Sparacino. John Sparacino, Eric Curcio, and Pappa had all begun sharing their own versions of the Scopa murder, Pappa's two friends taking the street credit for the slaying. Sparacino especially, who'd missed every shot and taken off running during the hit, was the most vocal about his supposed role. One night, the trio were partying with mutual friend Dino Basciano at Basciano's club, but after Pappa and Curcio left, Basciano and Sparacino stayed behind to chat. Sparacino waited for his friends to leave, then gave them a disgusted look and told Basciano that he'd done the Scopa job and that they were punks who'd left him behind while he took care of business. Basciano found the two that same night and asked them if what Sparacino said was true. Pappa then allegedly turned bright red and said he would cut Sparacino's heart out. On August 13, 1994, Henniger lured Sparacino to his home in Staten Island. He was allegedly so eager to murder Sparacino, he couldn't even hold himself back, and shot Sparacino in the back of the head before Pappa showed up. Pappa then eventually arrived, irate that Henniger had killed Sparacino first, and began mutilating the body. They hog-tied him, and Pappa attempted to skin Sparacino's face off to wear it as a mask, starting at the cheek and trying to pull the rest of it off. When that didn't work, they castrated their victim's body and stuffed his into his mouth. 2 days later, they got the body from Henniger's home in a stolen car, drove him out to another part of the island, and burned the car with Sparacino's body in it. Curcio later told Eborti about what had happened, and Eborti was growing concerned by Pappa's deranged behavior. Pappa called Eborti at some point in October, less than 2 months after Sparacino's murder, and promised him that he was going to kill Curcio as well. Curcio had been taking credit for the Scopa slaying, and not giving Pappa as much as he believed he deserved. So now Curcio had to go. Allegedly, Curcio had also killed a mutual friend of his and Pappa's, making Pappa's anger worse. However, no one was willing to help him out with the job. He attempted to enlist help from other Colombo gangsters, but everyone rejected him, leading to him doing it himself. On October 4, 1994, Pappa walked into Curcio's auto body shop and, without warning, sprayed his friend 10 times and left. The next day, he called Eborti, laughing and mocking Curcio. He began making machine gun noises, stopped, laughed a bit, and then made more gun noises after explaining how he'd killed Curcio.
From Oakland, California, our guest tonight, big time.
Curcio's slaying would be the last recorded one done by Pappa, but accusations of taking part in 6 other murders exist, including the random slaying of a stranger one night after he got dared to do it. Pappa had dreams of becoming a Colombo superstar and obtaining the status of a street legend, but at the end of the day, all he was another thug, a disposable killer for a crime family who didn't care too much for him and didn't pay him too well. He still had to sling drugs to make a living, despite being quick with the trigger, and he wasn't even offered official membership into the family between 1994 and 1997, and by the end of his career on the streets, he'd only been working for the better part of just 5 years. Police investigators were closing in on him. Informants in his circle, including Eborti and Russo, as well as overwhelming evidence for him and Henniger's involvement in the murders, led police to issuing a warrant for Pappa's arrest on September 26, 1997. As police went out to grab him that evening, Pappa was getting ready for his friend's wedding rehearsal. Salvatore Sparacino, the brother of the man Pappa had secretly helped kill and mutilate, was getting married, and Pappa was invited to the wedding. As he stood on the steps of St. Anne's Church in Staten Island, a troop of NYPD cars stopped on the curb and cops ran out with their handguns drawn. NYPD detective Thomas Dades yelled at Pappa to surrender, leading to Pappa whipping out a handgun and pointing it at the cops while clutching his stomach in a panic. They yelled at him to drop it, and he charged into the church as the crowd of relatives and friends stood by shocked. Pappa eventually chucked his gun under a pew and surrendered, while Salvatore Sparacino berated one of the officers excuse for arresting him like that in a church, one of the detectives revealed to Salvatore that they were arresting Pappa for killing his brother. Pappa underwent a short trial that saw testimony from some of his former friends and associates, including Russo, who implicated several mafia figures like Francis Guerra in the Scopa murder, as well as Theodore Persco for ordering it, and Michael for getting the gun. By the end of his trial, Pappa, still only 24 years old, got 4 life sentences and 45 years for drug trafficking, to be served without parole. He was one of the youngest mafia members in America to get such a sentence, if not the youngest. He wasn't forgotten in prison, however. He obviously had mafia contacts within the walls and received money regularly from mafia figures and their relatives, people like Joseph Chilli, George Zappola, Ilario Sessa, and Francis Guerra. The money allowed him to live a little more comfortably within USC Allenwood's harsh conditions, allowing him to learn how to cook, spend his days reading, and following the Yankees on TV. He also began an email correspondence with Guerra that police investigated in the mid-2000s, where he wrote often about the Yankees, cooking pasta, and making stromboli. In mid-2025, Pappa attempted to file for compassionate release, citing his time in prison as transformative, but his request was denied by the court, who cited statements made by the families of his victims, his lasting connections with organized crime figures behind bars, and the lack of empathy he held for his victims. It's likely that Pappa, jailed at the age of just 22, will die behind bars.
Contenders think I wrote it, but no, it's how I come on the daily. Double cuddle with bitches like Haley Berry and never marry. Mariah Carey fantasizes and sings. Let the Scorpio sting, and from the cartel the phone ring. It's strong, getting along like Rodney King. Folding green on the scene, know what I mean, an everyday thing. I keep going and it won't.